The last application that we're going to talk about for percents in Chapter 8 is simple interest. And copy down your target, and while you're doing that, I'm going to explain what simple interest is. Simple interest is money that you earn or money that you have to pay. For instance, if you're borrowing money from a bank, then you would pay interest for the use of that institution's money. So they charge you a fee for the convenience of using their money. You can also earn interest. So if you put a lot of money into a savings account, the bank really is borrowing your money now, and so they can add interest to your account based off of how much you have in there. You can also earn interest when you invest money. Simple interest is one type of interest, okay? We also have other types, but we're going to focus on simple interest for today. And simple interest earns on the original principal only. So as an extension topic, I'm going to show you what compound interest is, but that's not something needed for this class, okay? The simple interest formula, make sure you write this down, is I equals PRT, where I stands for the interest. That's going to be the interest you earn or the interest you must pay. The P stands for the principal. This principal, and it's spelled like the one that's your friend at school, the principal is the initial amount of money that you have, whether it's the initial amount of money that you invest or the initial amount of money that you borrow. That's going to be the principal. The R is your rate. The rate is always the percent, but make sure that you put it in as a decimal. So make sure that you use the decimal form for an equation. And then the last thing is T, and the T is time, and make sure that time is in years. So if it's not given to you in years, you might have to convert it to years, and we will talk about that. So make sure you copy down your interest formula as well as what the four variables stand for. You want to have all of those written down. We're going to practice applying this formula today and solving for a different part in each one of our examples, okay? Let's get started. So the first example, to buy a car, Jessica borrows $15,000 for 3 years at an annual simple interest rate of 9%. How much interest will she pay if she pays the entire loan off at the end of the 3rd year? And then what is the total amount that she will repay? So there's actually two questions here. I want to know how much interest she will pay, and then what's the total amount she will repay, which means what's everything that she will pay back, including the loan and the interest. So I like to set up my problem, but I like to use the side to define what I have and see which variables I don't have. Jessica borrowed $15,000, where that $15,000 is your principal. So write that down on the left. She borrowed this amount of money for a certain amount of time. It was 3 years. That's already in years, so the time is 3. And it was at a rate of 9%. But don't just leave that as 9%. That is what decimal? So move the decimal over 2 or divide by 100. So we don't know the interest, which means the I is what's going to stay in our formula. Now we're ready to substitute in. So I equals PRT. Substitute in all the numbers that you know. The I is the one we don't know, so that will remain a variable. The principal is $15,000. The rate is 0.09, and the time is 3 years. To find the interest then, you're just going to use your calculator to multiply all 3 of these together. So you use your calculator, 15,000 times 0.09 times 3. My interest on borrowing this amount of money for my car is going to be $4,050. Now that's the first part, that's the first question, that is my interest. What was the second question then? How much will she repay total? So here's one of your answers. Then to find how much she will repay total, you need to make sure that you remember she borrowed $15,000. She's not only going to pay back $4,000, right? She's got to pay back the interest plus also the loan. So my total repay is going to be the $15,000 plus the interest that she owes. Seems like a lot of money to borrow, a lot of money to spend really on just the convenience of borrowing. But that's how the world works. We have to pay interest on these things if you don't have the cash to buy it. So the total amount that she will repay is going to be $19,050. $450. Something to think about, because you know, if you buy a car and you don't have the money to pay for it up front, realize that when you look at the price of the car, you're going to be paying more than that when you pay it back. All right, perfect. So our first example done, we found the interest and the total. Make sure you read carefully and always answer what it's asking for. Let's try another one. On the second one, Andy invested $6,000 in a bond at a yearly rate of 3%. He earned $450 in interest. How many years was the amount invested? So again, I like to set up my IPRT on the left. Go ahead and do that. Reading the problem, what numbers do we know? What values do we know? Well, he invested $6,000. That's going to be my principal. It had a yearly rate of 3%. The percent is your rate. Convert that to your decimal. He earned $450 in interest. So the interest now is something that we know. And when we look at the question part, that tells us what we're not going to know, what we need to find. I want to know how many years the money was invested. So the time is what I don't know. That means that's going to be your t. That's just going to stay the variable. So we have I equals PRT. Know and memorize that formula for simple interest. Now substitute in everything that you know. My interest was $450. My principal was $6,000. The rate was 0.03. And the time remains my variable because I don't know that. That's what I'm finding. Let's simplify the multiplication first here. We have 6,000 times 0.003. Let's find out what that equals. That's going to be 180 times t equals 450. Now, to solve for t, isolate your variables, so divide or undo what's being done. So divide by 180. And we see 2.5. So we know that the time is going to be 2.5, and time is always in years. Or we could think about that a better way if we wanted to say how many years and how many months. You know, think about this decimal right here. So we know it's going to be 2 years, 2 whole amount. And then what does this 0.5 mean? What is 0.5 as a fraction? It is 1/2, right? Well, if you have half of a year, how many months is that? You can always think about the months, especially if you're given the time in months, as what is this out of 12? Because 12 months is the total number of months for 1 year, right? So I would multiply by 6. I would multiply by 6. You could say that this is 2 years and 6 months. Again, the way I got that was to think about what this decimal is if I were to rewrite it as a fraction out of 12. This tells you, the numerator over here tells you how many months it was. So 6.5 years or 2.5 years or 2 years and 6 months would be your answer. All right, one last example here. The last example. Sarah decides to build a new porch on her house. She took out a loan for $8,000 and paid back the money over the course of the next 4 years and 6 months. If she repaid a total of $10,340, at what interest rate did she borrow the money? So let's set up that IPRT and fill in what we know over here. She took out a loan for $8,000. That's going to be your principal. It's the amount that you're starting with. And she paid back the money over the course of the next 4 years, 6 months. Okay, we need to put the time all in years. So we have 4 years, 6 months. How are we going to write that as just years? Well, again, think about a decimal or a fraction. If you see something in months, you can think about the months being out of the total number of months in a year. So this would be 4 and 6/12 because there's 6 months that she has out of the 12 months total. And then you could make that a decimal if you like. So we know that's going to be 4 1/2 or 4.5 here. So she has 4.5 years for the time. The last piece of information that we know is that she repaid a total of $10,340. And hopefully you didn't throw that in right next to I, because we're not quite ready for that to be the interest. Think about it. That's the total. That's like what we found in number 1 after we found the interest. Where did the total come from? Well, the total that she repaid is going to come from whatever she borrowed plus her interest, right? We want to find the interest right here. That's what we need to put there. We know the total is $10,000, and we know that she borrowed $10,340, and we know that she borrowed $8,000. So how would you find what the interest is? You got to find the difference there, right? So let's subtract the $8,000, because the $10,340 is not the amount she paid back in interest. That's the total amount. That is the principal and the interest. We need to know just the interest to put into the interest formula to solve this. So we do that subtraction, and we get $2,340. That's going to go in for your interest over here. If you didn't catch that, fix that up on your notes right now. Now we are ready to solve this problem. We have the formula I equals PRT. We know our interest is $2,340 after we subtracted the principal from the total. The principal is $8,000. The rate is what we don't know this time, and the time is 4.5. Well, again, simplify each side of your equation. You have 8,000 times R times 4.5. You're allowed to reorder these by the commutative property of multiplication. So you can multiply these two together to get an answer. What is 8,000 times 4.5? All right, so we have 3,600. And that is still being multiplied. 36,000, excuse me, that is still being multiplied by your R. Now to solve for R, we could divide by that 36,000, and we will get our rate. Now remember, with your rate, you're going to get your answer as a decimal. The rate should be given to you as a percent, so we will need to convert it. Go ahead and do your division on your calculator here. And we get this decimal. So what percent would that be? Remember, you can multiply it by 100 to get the percent. That's just going to move the decimal point 2 to the right. So we'd have 6.5% rate. So we've used the interest formula. We've solved for interest. We solved for principal. We solved for rate. We've solved for, we haven't solved for principal, but we solved for interest, rate, and time, and also total. You're going to try a couple more problems on the quick check, and then as an extra extension, you can take a look at compound interest if you're looking for something extra above and beyond what you need to know for this class. Great job.